Sometimes the deepest act of love is respecting a boundary you don't understand. For 35 years, Whit Carver honored his late wife's one request: stay out of the barn. He never asked why. He never needed to. That was just how they loved each other. Now 68 and alone on their quiet farm, Whit finally unlocks those weathered doors. Inside, he finds her secret world: paintings, letters, and sculptures she created in silence over decades. At the center hangs a portrait of their family, carefully painted as their children grew and life moved forward. But what drops him to his knees isn't the art itself. It's what she left for him to discover, a message that changes everything he thought he knew. What could she have been hiding all those years? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months had passed since Lorna died, and Whit Carver still couldn't bring himself to move her wedding ring from the windowsill above the kitchen sink. Every morning, the sun caught the simple gold band just right, sending a small circle of light across the worn wooden counter. He'd stand there with his coffee, watching that light, remembering how her hand felt in his 40 years ago when he slipped that ring on her finger. The farmhouse hadn't changed much since that day. Same creaking floorboards in the hallway, same view of the cornfields stretching toward the horizon from the front porch. Same smell of wood smoke and coffee that seemed baked into the walls after decades of early mornings and late nights. Whit had built most of this house himself, back when he was 28 and Lorna was 26, both of them young enough to think they could make a life out of nothing but hard work and love. Turned out they were right. The phone rang around 9 that morning, disrupting his routine of staring at that ring and pretending he wasn't talking to his dead wife in his head. "Dad, you there?" Paulette's voice carried the particular tone of a daughter who'd been worrying about her father living alone. "I'm here, honey. Same as yesterday. Have you eaten breakfast?" "Toast. Coffee." "That's not breakfast, that's surviving." She sighed, and he could picture her in her kitchen 2 hours away, probably making lunches for his grandchildren while holding the phone against her shoulder. "Kenny's driving up this weekend. Says he wants to help with the fence repair." "Fence is fine." "Dad." "All right, the fence needs work." Whit smiled despite himself. His middle child had inherited Lorna's ability to see right through him. "Tell him to come Saturday. I'll make lunch." After they hung up, Whit carried his coffee to the front porch, settling into the rocking chair that had molded itself to his body over the years. The morning stretched before him like it always did now, empty hours he used to fill with work, with Lorna's voice from the kitchen, with the simple rhythm of a shared life. The barn stood about 50 yards from the house, red paint weathered to the color of dried blood, roof still solid despite its age. He'd built that too, the summer after their oldest boy was born. Lorna had specific requirements: tall doors, good light, a sturdy lock. He'd thought she wanted storage space, maybe a workshop for canning or craft projects. "Promise me, Whit," she'd said the day he finished it, standing in the empty interior with sawdust still floating in the air. "This is my space, just mine." He'd looked at her then, really looked. Something in her eyes he couldn't quite name, not fear, not anger, but something desperate and necessary. So he'd promised. Never asked why, never pushed. That was how they worked, how they'd always worked. Respect, trust, space when it was needed. For 35 years he'd kept that promise. He'd hear music sometimes, drifting across the yard on summer evenings. Classical stuff, nothing he recognized. Sometimes he'd see the lights on past midnight, a golden glow seeping through the cracks in the barn walls. He'd wonder what she was doing in there, but never enough to break his word. Lorna would emerge eventually hours later, sometimes with paint under her fingernails or sawdust in her hair, wearing that particular expression of peace he'd learned to recognize. "Good session?" he'd ask. "Good session," she'd confirm. and that would be enough. Their youngest, Brent, called around noon. "How you holding up, Pop?" "Fine as frog hair," Whit answered, using the phrase that always made his son laugh. "That doesn't even make sense. Frogs don't have hair." "Exactly. Makes it pretty fine." Whit settled back into his chair. "Your sister says Kenny's coming up this weekend." "Yeah, he told me. Thinks you need looking after." "I'm 68, not 98. I know that. But Dad—" Brent paused, searching for words. "It's okay to not be okay. Mum just died. You don't have to be fine all the time." Whit watched a hawk circle over the east field, riding the thermals. "I'm managing, son. Some days better than others. But I'm managing." After Brent hung up, Whit thought about that word. Managing. It was what he'd done his whole life, manage the farm through droughts and floods, manage the finances when money got tight, managed his own feelings so Lorna didn't have to carry them too. She'd had enough to carry. He remembered the year Kenny got sick, 8 years old, mysterious fever that wouldn't break. Lorna had been so scared she'd stopped sleeping, just sat by their son's bed night after night. Whit would find her in the barn, sometimes during that period, gone for hours. He'd worried then, wondered if she was running from the fear. But when Kenny finally recovered, Lorna had told him something he never forgot. "That barn saved me," she'd said quietly, lying beside him in bed. "I was drowning in terror, and I needed somewhere to put it. Somewhere it couldn't hurt Kenny, or you, or anyone." He'd held her tighter that night, grateful for whatever magic that barn worked on his wife. The memories kept coming, like they did most days now. Their wedding, under the old oak tree on the property, Lorna in a simple white dress she'd sewn herself. The way she'd cried when Paulette was born. Not sad tears, but overwhelmed ones. "I made a person," she'd whispered, staring at their daughter. "We made a person, Whit." The lean years, when corn prices dropped and they'd almost lost everything. Whit had sold his father's tractor, the one thing he'd inherited, the one thing he'd meant to pass down. Lorna had held him that night while he didn't cry, her hand steady on his back. She'd been quiet, his Lorna. Not shy exactly, but careful with her words, like she was rationing something precious. She'd listen more than she spoke, and when she did speak, people paid attention because they knew she meant it. The farm wives in the town had tried to include her in their committees and book clubs, and she'd gone sometimes, but Whit could tell it wore her out. Too much chatter, too many people, too much expected conversation. "I'm not unhappy," she'd told him once, maybe 20 years into their marriage. "I just need quiet sometimes." "Is that all right?" "It's all right," he'd assured her. "You're allowed to be however you are." The barn had been part of that somehow, her refuge, her quiet. Around 3 in the afternoon, Whit went inside to start thinking about dinner. The house felt too big now, too full of empty rooms and silent spaces. He'd catch himself setting 2 plates sometimes, forgetting for just a moment. The grief came in waves, like that sneaking up when he wasn't paying attention, knocking him sideways when he thought he was doing fine. He was putting away the clean dishes when he saw Lorna's jewelry box on her dresser, the lid slightly open. He hadn't touched her things much, couldn't bring himself to pack them away yet, but something drew him to that box now, some instinct he couldn't name. Inside, beneath the few pieces of jewelry she'd owned, nothing fancy, just practical things, he found an envelope, his name on the front in her neat handwriting. And taped to the envelope, a heavy iron key he recognized immediately. The barn key. His hands shook as he opened the envelope, pulling out a single piece of paper. The note was brief, just a few words in Lorna's familiar script. "When you're ready." Whit sat on the edge of their bed, holding that key, feeling its weight. 35 years. 35 years of respecting her boundary, of trusting her need for privacy, of loving her enough to let her have secrets, and now she was giving him permission to know. He looked out the bedroom window at the barn, sitting solid and familiar in the afternoon light. What was in there? What had she been doing all those years? What had she wanted him to find? The questions crowded his mind, but underneath them all was something else, fear. Not of what he'd discover, but of breaking the promise even now, even with her permission. Some habits run too deep to shake easily. Whit placed the key and note on the nightstand, next to the book Lorna had been reading when she died. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow he'd decide what to do. But as evening fell, and he sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the barn, he knew he was lying to himself. He'd already decided. The moment he'd seen that note, he'd known. "When you're ready," she'd written. The question was, would he ever be ready? For 3 days, the key sat on Whit's nightstand, like an accusation. He'd wake up and see it there, catching the morning light, same as Lorna's ring in the kitchen. He'd go about his day, feeding the chickens, checking the irrigation, fixing a loose board on the porch, and the key would wait. Patient. Inevitable. On the third evening, Paulette's truck pulled into the driveway. She didn't call. A head just showed up the way she used to when Lorna was sick, and Paulette wanted to check without making a fuss about it. "Hey, Dad." She hugged him at the door, and Whit noticed she'd brought groceries. "Thought I'd make dinner. Real dinner, not toast." They worked together in the kitchen, falling into the easy rhythm of people who'd shared this space before. Paulette chopped vegetables, while Whit seasoned the chicken. She talked about the grandkids. 10-year-old Lucy had made the soccer team. 8-year-old Griffin was reading above his grade level. "They ask about you," Paulette said, scraping carrots into the pan. "Want to know when they can visit the farm again." "Anytime. You know that." "I know. But Dad..." She set down the knife, turning to face him. "Have you been in the barn yet?" Whit's hands stilled on the chicken. "How did you know about that?" "Mom told me. About 6 months before she died." Paulette's eyes were soft with understanding. "She said she was leaving you. The key. Said you'd need time, but eventually you'd go in." "Did she tell you what's in there?" "No. Just that it was important. That it was her story, and she wanted you to read it when she was gone." Paulette touched his arm gently. "Have you opened it?" "Can't seem to bring myself to do it." "Why not?" 35 years, Paulette. 35 years I respected that boundary. Feels wrong to cross it now, even with permission. Dad, she didn't just give permission. She wanted you to go in. That's different. Paulette came to stand beside him. Mom loved you. Whatever's in there, it's not going to change that. What if I find out she was unhappy? What if... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "What if she needed something you didn't give her?" Paulette finished gently. "Is that what you're afraid of?" Whit nodded, not trusting his voice. "Dad, listen to me. Mom was complicated. She loved us. Loved this life. But she was also her own person with her own needs. Whatever's in that barn, it's part of who she was. Don't you want to know all of her?" They ate dinner mostly in silence after that, both thinking their own thoughts. When Paulette left around 9, she kissed his cheek and said, "You'll go when you're ready. But Dad, I think you're more ready than you know." That night, Whit couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering moments with Lorna. The way she'd hum while cooking, how she'd touch his shoulder when she walked past his chair. The rare times she'd really laugh at something one of the kids did, and the sound would fill the whole house. He remembered finding her in the barn doorway once, maybe 15 years ago. She'd been standing there at sunset, just looking in, and there'd been something on her face he couldn't quite read. Not sadness exactly, more like longing mixed with contentment, if that was possible. "You okay?" he'd asked. She'd turned to him with a smile. "Yes, just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky I am. To have this." She gestured vaguely at the barn, the farm, him. "To have a place that's mine." He hadn't understood it then. Maybe he was about to now. Dawn came soft and golden, the kind of June morning that made you remember why you loved this land. Whit made his coffee, stood at the sink watching Lorna's ring catch the light, and made his decision. Today, he'd do it today. He took his time with breakfast, like a man preparing for something significant, showered and dressed in clean clothes, as if paying respect. Put the key in his pocket, where it rested heavy against his thigh. The walk across the yard felt longer than 50 yards, each step deliberate, purposeful. The grass was still wet with dew, and birds were singing in the old oak tree. Normal morning sounds on a day that felt anything but normal. The barn door was solid oak, weathered grey by decades of weather. The padlock was. Newer Lorna had replaced it maybe 10 years back, though Whit had never asked why. His hand shook slightly as he fitted the key into the lock. It turned smooth as butter, well-oiled despite the years. Whit took a breath, then another. Behind this door was something Lorna had kept from him for 35 years, something important enough to guard, to protect, to keep sacred. And now she wanted him to see it. He pulled the door open. Light flooded in, and for a moment Whit couldn't process what he was seeing. His brain expected dust and cobwebs, abandoned equipment, maybe some old furniture. Instead, he found himself staring at a space that looked lived in, loved, purposefully arranged. The barn had been transformed into a studio, not hastily or haphazardly, but with clear intention and care. Easels stood at intervals, canvases stacked against the walls. Shelves lined one side, organized with jars of brushes, tubes of paint, bottles of what looked like linseed oil. A workbench held. Carving tools, pieces of wood in various stages of completion. The floor was worn smooth in paths between the work areas, evidence of decades of movement. But it was the far wall that stopped his heart. A massive canvas hung there, had to be 6 feet tall and 8 feet wide, and on it was his family. Not a photograph, but a painting. Him and Lorna and their 3 children, rendered in oils with a skill that took his breath away. Whit moved closer, his legs carrying him forward without conscious thought. The painting was layered, he realized. You could see different ages of the same people, like time had been compressed into one image. Kenny as a toddler, then a teenager, then a man. Paulette in pigtails, then her wedding dress, then holding her own babies. Brent growing from a gap-toothed boy to a broad-shouldered adult. And Lorna. Lorna young and hopeful. Lorna tired and determined. Lorna older, wiser, lined with years. All the versions of her he'd loved, captured in layers of paint. And himself. Whit saw his own face repeated across time, young and strong, middle-aged and weathered, old and lined but steady. Always steady. She'd painted them over years. Had to have. You could see the different paint techniques, the way her skill had grown. This wasn't one painting but dozens, layered one over another as their lives unfolded. His knees gave out. Just buckled, and suddenly Whit was kneeling on the barn floor, staring up at this portrait of his life, his family seeing it through Lorna's eyes for the first time. She'd seen all this, had captured it, preserved it, studied it in solitude. While he'd been living his life day by day, she'd been recording it, documenting it, turning their ordinary existence into art. The tears came hard and fast, surprising him with their intensity. Not sad tears exactly, though grief was part of it. More like overwhelmed tears, grateful tears. Tears for time passing and love enduring, and the profound discovery that the woman he'd lived with for 40 years had hidden depths he'd never imagined. "Lorna," he whispered to the empty barn. "Oh, Lorna, what did you do here?" But even as he asked, he was beginning to understand. This barn wasn't just storage or hobby space. It was where Lorna had come to be herself, fully herself. Not wife or mother or farm wife, but Lorna, artist, creator, observer of her own life. and she'd kept it secret not out of shame but out of necessity. This was her breath, her air, her space to exist outside the roles that defined her everywhere else. Whit stayed on his knees for a long time, crying and staring at that painting until the tears finally stopped and he could breathe again. When he finally stood, his legs were stiff and his eyes were swollen, but something had shifted inside him. Whatever else he found in this barn, whatever other secrets it held, one thing was already clear. Lorna had loved them enough to paint them over and over across the years. She'd loved them enough to create this private testament to their lives together, and she'd loved him enough to leave him the key. Whit couldn't bring himself to leave the barn. Hours passed while he explored, touching things gently, like they might disappear if handled too roughly. The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows Lorna had insisted on, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. The shelves were organized by year, he discovered. Each section labeled in Lorna's neat handwriting, 1989, 1995, 2003, on and on. He pulled down a leather journal from the earliest section, dated the year they'd bought the farm. The first entry was simple. I need this space. Not because I don't love them, but because I need to remember who I am beyond wife and mother. This barn is where Lorna lives. Just Lorna, nothing else required. Whit sat on the wooden stool by the workbench and kept reading. Lorna's voice came through clearly on the pages, honest, reflective, sometimes uncertain. She wrote about learning to paint from library books, about ordering supplies from catalogues and hiding the expense in the grocery budget, about the first time she completed a landscape and felt something shift inside her. Today I painted the east field at sunrise, one entry read. Took me 6 hours and it's probably terrible, but I don't care. For 6 hours I wasn't thinking about dinner or laundry or whether Kenny's cough means another doctor visit. I was just seeing, just creating, just being. He moved to the canvases stacked against the walls, landscapes mostly their farm in different seasons, different lights, different moods. The old oak tree in summer bloom, the cornfields heavy with autumn harvest, the farmhouse covered in January snow. She'd painted their world over and over, finding new ways to see what had become familiar. Then he found the portraits. Kenny as a baby, sleeping with his fist curled against his cheek. Paulette at 5, gap-toothed and grinning. Brent as a toddler, covered in mud and delighted about it. Paintings of moments. Whit remembered living but had never seen captured this way. She'd painted from memory and photographs, he realized. Never asked them to sit. Never interrupted their lives to create these records. She'd simply observed, remembered, and later translated those memories into paint. His hands shook as he found a painting of himself. He was younger in it, maybe 40, standing in the cornfield with his hat pushed back, squinting into the distance. He didn't remember the moment, but Lorna had. She'd preserved it, studied it, rendered it with careful attention to detail. The wooden sculptures were scattered throughout the space. Small, carved animals, a rabbit, a deer, a fox. Abstract pieces that suggested movement or emotion without defining them. And there, on a shelf by itself, a carving of hands. Whit picked it up carefully. Oak, smooth from hours of work. The hands were rough and scarred, clearly a working man's hands, holding something small and delicate, a bird, wings spread as if about to fly. His hands. He recognized the scars, the shape, the way the knuckles were slightly swollen from years of labor. Lorna had carved his hands, holding hope, holding fragility, holding something beautiful that could fly away at any moment. He had to call Paulette, had to share this with someone, or burst from the weight of it. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, you need to come here." His voice cracked. "You need to see this." "See what? Are you okay?" "I'm in the barn." "Paulette, you need to see what your mother did." Silence on the other end. Then, "I'll be there in 2 hours." Whit spent those hours reading more journals, looking at more paintings. He found a series of portraits, his children growing up in chronological order. Kenny at 1, at 5, at 10, at 15. The same for Paulette and Brent. Lorna had documented their childhoods in secret, creating a visual record of the lives she'd helped shape. One journal entry stopped him cold. Kenny was in the hospital today. The fever won't break and they don't know why. I'm so scared I can barely breathe, but I can't show it. Can't let Whit see how terrified I am because he needs to stay strong for Kenny. So I came here and painted the fear black and red and purple, painted it out of my body and onto canvas where it can't hurt anyone. He found that painting dark, turbulent, full of violent slashes of color, nothing recognizable, just raw emotion made visible, and dated the exact week Kenny had been sick. When Paulette arrived, Whit was sitting on the floor, surrounded by paintings, journals spread open around him. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking it all in. "Oh, Mom," she whispered. "Come see," Whit said, gesturing her forward. They spent the next hour exploring together. Paulette cried when she saw the portraits of herself braiding her hair at 12, her high school graduation, her wedding day. Moments she remembered her mother being present for, but not knowing Lorna was memorizing every detail to paint later. "She never showed us," Paulette said, touching a painting of herself reading in the old armchair. "Why didn't she show us?" "I think she needed it to be just hers," Whit answered slowly, trying to understand even as he spoke. "Not for praise or validation, just for the doing of it." They found more journals together, entries about the financial struggles. Whit sold his father's tractor today to save the farm. He didn't cry, but I cried for him. Painted him tonight from memory, tried to capture the strength in him that lets him sacrifice without complaint. Entries about joy. Brent caught his first fish today. The pride on Whit's face, the wonder on Brent's. These are the moments I paint for, the ones I want to hold forever. Entries about loneliness. Sometimes the farm feels so isolated. The other wives in town are kind, but I don't fit with them. Too quiet, too different. This barn understands me better than people do. Paulette found a letter addressed to her, sealed but never sent. She looked at Whit. "Should I?" "She left them for us to find," he said. "I think we're meant to read them." Paulette opened it carefully. Her eyes filled as she read silently, then she read aloud. "My darling girl, you remind me so much of myself at your age. Stubborn, dreaming of places beyond this farm. I hope you fly farther than I did. I hope you see all the things I only imagined. But I also hope you understand someday that staying can be a choice too, not a surrender. I chose this life. I chose your father. I chose you and your brothers. And I'd choose it again, even knowing all the dreams I'd leave unpainted." "Did she regret it?" Paulette asked, looking at the barn full of art. "Staying here? Staying with Dad?" Whit thought about that, about the journals and paintings and the care put into every piece. "No," he said finally. "I don't think she regretted. I think she just needed space to acknowledge what she'd given up while also celebrating what she'd chosen." Both things could be true. They found paintings Whit recognized now, landscapes of specific days he remembered. The morning after Kenny came home from the hospital, painted in soft golds and peaceful blues. Their 25th anniversary, the oak tree rendered with special care. The day Brent left for college, the empty farmhouse painted with bittersweet precision. "She was processing everything here," Paulette said. "Every big moment, every emotion, every memory she wanted to hold." 35 years of her interior life, Whit agreed. "Right here. And I never knew. Would it have changed anything if you'd known?" Whit considered that. Maybe. Or maybe it needed to be secret to work. Maybe she needed one place where she didn't have to explain herself to anyone. They found a locked cabinet near the back. Paulette tried the handle. It stuck. Or Locked, Whit said. Maybe there's more she wasn't ready to share yet. Or maybe we need to find another key. As the sun began to set, they carefully put things back where they'd found them. The barn felt sacred now, like a church or a memorial. Whit couldn't shake the feeling that Lorna was somehow still here, present in every brushstroke and carved line. Walking back to the house, Paulette linked her arm through his. "Are you okay, Dad?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I feel like I'm meeting her for the first time, even though I lived with her for 40 years. Maybe we never really know anyone completely. Maybe that's all right. Maybe the mystery is part of the love." That night, Whit couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't fear keeping him awake. It was wonder. Lorna had been an artist, a real artist, skilled and dedicated and passionate, and she'd kept it hidden not from shame, but from some deep need he was only beginning to understand. He got up and went to the window, looking out at the gorgeous barn in the moonlight. Tomorrow he'd go back. There was more to discover, more to learn about the woman he'd thought he knew completely. And for the first time since she'd died, he felt close to her again. Not the hollow ache of absence, but something fuller. She'd left him a gift, the truth of who she was when no one was watching. He just had to be brave enough to keep looking. Whit started spending entire days in the barn. He'd bring his lunch in a paper sack, a thermos of coffee, and settle in like a man reading a long book he couldn't put down. Each painting, each journal entry, each carved figure was another page in the story of Lorna's interior life. His sons arrived on Saturday, Kenny first, then Brent an hour later. Whit had called them both, said simply that they needed to see what their mother had left behind. Neither had been prepared. Kenny stood in the doorway, taking it all in, and his face went through several emotions before settling on anger. Why didn't she tell us? "Come look," Whit said gently. "Maybe you'll understand." But Kenny's jaw was tight as he moved through the space. He picked up paintings roughly, flipped through journals with sharp movements. 35 years. She had this whole secret life and never said a word. It wasn't secret like you're thinking, Whit tried to explain. It was private. There's a difference. Is there? Kenny turned to face him. Because it feels like she didn't trust us enough to share this. Brent was quieter, moving slowly from piece to piece with an expression of awe. He stopped at a painting of himself at maybe 7 years old, standing in the cornfield with a kite. "I remember this day," he said softly. "The kite got stuck in the oak tree. Dad climbed up to get it. She painted it from memory," Whit told him. "All of these she painted from memory." "She had this whole other life," Brent said, but unlike Kenny, there was wonder in his voice rather than anger. "We never knew." Kenny found the new painting from the year he'd been sick, the dark, violent one, full of turbulent colors. He stared at it for a long time. "What is this?" "That's from when you were in the hospital," Whit said quietly. "Read the journal entry from that week." Kenny did, and his face changed as he read Lorna's words about fear and terror and needing somewhere to put the emotions that were too big to carry. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "She was so scared," he said. "She couldn't show it," Whit replied. "Not to us. Not when we needed her to be strong. So she brought it here." The anger drained from Kenny's face, replaced by something more complicated. Understanding mixed with grief, love mixed with regret. "I never knew she felt that way. None of us did. That was the point." They spent hours together, the 3 men moving through Lorna's hidden world. They found paintings that corresponded to every major event in their lives. Paulette's wedding, a joyful piece full of white and gold, and hope. Brent leaving for college, the empty farmhouse rendered with aching detail. Kenny's recovery, a sunrise painting so beautiful it hurt to look at. She processed everything here, Brent said, understanding dawning. This was her therapy. More than that, Whit said. This was where she remembered who she was. Beyond being our wife and mother, just Lorna. They found letters she'd written but never sent. Kenny read one addressed to him. "My stubborn, loyal boy, you're so much like your father it scares me sometimes. You carry everything alone, thinking that's strength, but real strength is letting people help carry the weight. I hope you learn that sooner than he did." Kenny looked at Whit. "Did you learn that?" "Still learning," Whit admitted. Brent found his letter. "My youngest, my surprise, my joy. You came when I thought we were done having children, and you reminded me that life doesn't follow our plans. You're the freest of my children, the one least afraid to show emotion. Don't ever lose that, even when the world tells you to harden up." "She saw us," Brent said, voice thick. "Really saw us." "She saw everything," Whit agreed. "And she wrote it down here because she couldn't always say it out loud. They discovered a series of paintings Whit hadn't noticed before, abstract pieces that corresponded to difficult years. The year the corn crop failed, painted in browns and greys. The year Whit's mother died, all cold blues and empty spaces. The year Kenny got divorced, rendered in fractured lines and harsh angles. She felt all of it," Kenny said. "Everything we went through, she felt it with us. And then she came here and made it into something beautiful," Paulette added. "She'd arrived while they were reading letters, joined them in the exploration, or at least into something she could hold and examine. They found paintings of moments that seemed ordinary, but that Lorna had elevated into something worth preserving. Whit teaching Brent to fish. Kenny fixing the tractor with his father. Paulette baking bread in the kitchen. Simple moments, rendered with such care and attention that they became significant just by being noticed. "Why didn't she show these to us?" Kenny asked again, but this time without anger. "They're good, really good." "Maybe that wasn't the point," Whit said. "Maybe the creating was enough. Maybe she didn't need our validation. Or maybe she was afraid we wouldn't understand," Paulette suggested quietly. "Afraid we'd think wanting this space meant she didn't love us enough. They all considered that." Whit thought about the journal entries he'd read, about Lorna's careful balance between family and self, about her fear that needing solitude meant she was failing somehow. "She loved us," Brent said firmly. "You can see it in every painting, the way she looked at us, remembered us, preserved us. This whole barn is love made visible." "Then why keep it secret?" Kenny pressed. "Because love doesn't mean you give up everything," Whit said slowly, working it out as he spoke. "She loved us enough to give us almost everything. But she kept this. One space, one part of herself that was just hers. And maybe that's what let her love us so fully everywhere else." The four of them sat together on the barn floor as afternoon faded into evening. They passed around the paint-stained apron that hung by the door, touched the brushes worn down from years of use, ran their hands over the smooth wood of the workbench. "She was here almost every day," Paulette said. "All those times we thought she was just puttering around out here. She was working," Whit said, "creating, being herself in the only way she knew how." Kenny picked up the carved hands, Whit's hands holding the bird. "She saw the best in all of us, even when we couldn't see it ourselves." "Especially then," Whit agreed. As they prepared to leave, Brent noticed the locked cabinet. "What's in there?" "Don't know yet," Whit said. "Haven't found the key." "Should we break it open?" Kenny asked. "No," Whit said firmly. "If Lorna locked it, she had a reason. We'll find the key when we're meant to." They walked back to the farmhouse together, and Whit made dinner for his family. They ate and talked about Lorna, sharing memories and revelations, piecing together the woman they'd known with the artist they'd just discovered. "She was more complicated than we thought," Paulette said. "Most people are," Whit replied. "We just don't usually get to see behind the curtain like this." After everyone left, Whit returned to the barn alone. He stood before the massive family portrait, studying the layered images of his life. Young Lorna and old Lorna, both present in the same canvas, his children growing and changing, yet somehow all their ages visible at once. She'd built this painting the way she'd built their life, slowly, carefully, adding to it year by year, never finished, always evolving, always growing into something more complete. He touched the paint gently, feeling the texture of dried oils. Somewhere in these layers was the day they'd brought Kenny home from the hospital. The afternoon, Paulette got married. The morning, Brent graduated. All their big moments and small ones compressed into this single testament of a life witnessed and remembered and loved. "I'm beginning to understand," he whispered to the empty barn. "I'm beginning to see what you were doing here." But even as he said it, he knew there was more. The locked cabinet waited in the shadows, holding secrets Lorna hadn't been ready to share yet. And somewhere in this barn was the key that would reveal the final layer of truth. The next morning, Whit found himself drawn back to the journals. He'd been reading them chronologically, but now he wanted to understand the progression, how Lorna had changed over the years, how her thoughts had evolved alongside her art. He pulled down journals from different decades and spread them across the workbench. The earliest entries were tentative, almost apologetic. "I shouldn't need this space. I should be content with wife and mother. But I'm not, and I have to be honest about that, at least here." 10 years later, the tone had shifted, more confident, more assured. "This barn saved my sanity today." Kenny's teenage anger, Paulette's tears over some boy, Brent's questions I don't have answers for. I love them fiercely, but I needed silence. Needed to paint until my hands ached and my mind went quiet. 20 years in, acceptance. I used to feel guilty about needing this. Now I understand it's what makes everything else possible. I can be a good wife because I have this space to be just Lorna. I can be a good mother because I have somewhere to set down the weight of it, even briefly. Whit found a wooden box tucked beneath the workbench. Inside were letters, dozens of them, organized by year, all sealed, all addressed to family members. Letters Lorna had written but never sent, he opened. The first one, dated 40 years ago, addressed to him. "My dearest Whit, we've been married 3 months and I'm already afraid I'm not enough for you. You're so steady, so sure. And I'm full of doubts and needs I don't know how to voice. I want to be the wife you deserve, but I also want to be myself. I hope those two things aren't mutually exclusive. I hope loving you doesn't mean losing me." Whit's throat tightened. She'd been afraid even then, afraid of disappointing him, of not measuring up, of wanting something beyond what their life offered. Another letter, 5 years later. "I'm pregnant with Paulette and terrified. Not of being a mother, I want this baby so much, but of disappearing into motherhood, of becoming just mum and forgetting there was ever a Lorna underneath. This barn is my insurance policy against vanishing. Letters during the hard years. We almost lost the farm today. Whit sold his father's tractor, the one thing he treasured from his old man, and he didn't shed a tear. Just set his jaw and made the call. I cried for him in the barn, painted his grief since he won't acknowledge it. Someone has to witness what he sacrifices." Letters about joy. Watched Whit teach Brent to fish this morning. The patience in him is endless. The gentleness. He doesn't know how beautiful he is in these moments, how his love shows in every careful word and steady hand. I wish I could tell him, but the words stick in my throat, so I'll paint it instead. Whit realized these letters were Lorna's truest voice. In person, she'd been careful, measured, guarded with her words. But here, on paper never meant to be read, she'd been completely honest. He found letters to each of their children, written at different ages. To infant Kenny, "I'm terrified I'll do this wrong. You're so small and I'm so responsible for you, and what if I break you? But your father believes in me, and maybe that's enough to start." To teenage Paulette, "You want to leave this farm so badly, I can see it in every restless movement. You remind me of myself at your age, dreaming of elsewhere. I hope you fly, sweetheart. I hope you go everywhere I only imagined. But I also hope you understand someday that staying can be a choice too, not a trap. To young Brent, you're my surprise baby, my unexpected joy. I thought we were done, and then you came along, reminding me that life doesn't follow plans. You're teaching me to be more spontaneous, less controlled. Thank you for that gift. Letters written during difficult times revealed Lorna's deep awareness of everyone's struggles. About Kenny's illness, he's so small in that hospital bed and I can't fix it. I can only sit and wait and pray. But I can't fall apart because Whit needs me strong and Kenny needs me calm. So I come to the barn and let the terror out where it can't hurt anyone. About their financial crisis, I see what this is costing Whit. Not just money, but pride and hope and the future he imagined. He carries it alone because that's who he is. I wish he'd let me carry some of it, but I also understand why he doesn't. So I carry it here, in paint, in wood, in the privacy of this space. Nothing remarkable happened today, but somehow everything was remarkable. Whit fixed the fence. I made bread, the children played in the yard. This is the life I chose, and it's enough. More than enough. It's everything. Whit spent hours reading, piecing together the narrative Lorna had written in fragments across decades. She'd been lonely sometimes, overwhelmed often, grateful always. The barn had been her outlet for all of it, the good and the bad, the joy and the sorrow, the love and the occasional resentment that came from giving so much of herself to others. One letter stopped him completely, written 10 years ago, addressed to him. I saw a documentary about a woman artist tonight. She was alone, celebrated, and profoundly lonely. She had her art, but no one to share her life with. I have you, I have our children, I have this barn. Maybe I didn't get to be a famous artist, but I got to be a woman who created while also being loved. That's not a small thing. That might be everything. He found another letter from 5 years ago, and the handwriting was slightly shakier. I'm forgetting things. Small things, where I put my keys, what I ate for breakfast. I'm afraid of what this means. Afraid of losing myself before I'm ready, but at least I have this place. At least I've documented everything that matters. If I forget, I can come here and remember. The early signs of her illness. Whit remembered those days, the small slips she'd tried to hide, the frustration when she couldn't recall something simple. He'd watched her decline slowly, seen her struggle to hold on to herself as her memory began to fade. The most recent journals showed that struggle. Shorter entries, simpler sentences, sometimes just descriptions of what she'd painted that day, but also moments of clarity, of Lorna fighting to preserve herself in words and images before the forgetting took her completely. I painted the family portrait again today, added to it, made sure everyone is there, every version of us. If I forget who we were, at least this will remember for me. Whit's vision blurred. She'd known she was losing herself and raced against time to document everything that mattered. The barn hadn't just been her refuge, it had been her memory palace, her attempt to preserve what the illness would steal. He found a letter dated 2 years before her death, addressed to him. His hands shook as he opened it. My love, if you're reading this, I'm either gone or I've forgotten who you are. Both thoughts break my heart. I want you to know that this barn, all of this, it was never about not loving you. It was about loving you so much I needed to stay whole enough to do it well. Every painting, every carving, every word in these journals, it's all love. Love for you, for our children, for the life we built. I just needed space to process that love, to hold it and examine it and make something beautiful from it. Thank you for giving me that space. Thank you for never demanding explanations. Thank you for trusting me, even when you didn't understand. You were always enough, Whit, more than enough. You were everything. Whit sat in the gathering darkness, holding that letter, finally understanding. The barn hadn't been about keeping him out. It had been about keeping herself whole so she could fully be with him everywhere else. And she'd succeeded. Right up until the illness took her, she'd been present, loving his Lorna, because this space had given her room to breathe, to create, to be more than the roles that defined her. He understood now. Finally, completely, he understood. Whit held the letter for a long time, reading and rereading those final lines. You were always enough. You were everything. Words Lorna had struggled to say aloud, but had poured onto paper with complete honesty. As he folded the letter carefully, something fell from between the pages. A small brass key, different from the barn key. Lighter, newer. He turned it over in his palm, and understanding dawned slowly. The locked cabinet. His heart hammered as he stood, walked to the back of the barn where the cabinet waited in shadows. The key slid into the lock smoothly, and the door opened with a soft click. Inside were canvases turned backward against the cabinet walls, more journals, and a yellowed college catalogue. Whit pulled out the first canvas and turned it around. The painting showed a younger Lorna, maybe 25, standing in what looked like an art studio. Large windows, easels everywhere, other people painting in the background. She was smiling, vibrant, completely absorbed in her work, but this wasn't a memory. The style was different, more wistful, almost dreamlike. He turned another canvas. Lorna in a gallery, her paintings on white walls, people admiring them. She wore a dress he'd never seen, stood in a room he didn't recognize. Another. Lorna in Paris, standing before the Louvre, sketchbook in hand. Another. Lorna teaching an art class, students gathered around, looking at her with respect and attention. One more. Lorna in a small apartment with city lights visible through a large window, painting alone but looking content. Whit's hands trembled as understanding crashed over him. These weren't memories. These were dreams, alternate lives. The paths Lorna hadn't taken. He found the college catalogue dated 43 years ago, before they'd married. Inside was an application, filled out in Lorna's neat handwriting. School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Full scholarship offer letter paperclip to the application. She'd been accepted. Full ride, and she'd never told him. The journal from that year was underneath everything. Whit opened it with dread and hope, tangled together in his chest. I got the acceptance letter today, full scholarship to art school in Chicago. It's everything I wanted, everything I dreamed about since I was a girl drawing in the margins of my school books. But Whit proposed last week, and his family's farm needs both of us to survive. His father is sick, his mother overwhelmed. If I leave, everything they've built collapses. If I stay, my dream dies. How do you choose between love and self? How do you pick one future and let the other dissolve like it never mattered? Whit sat down hard on the floor, the journal in his lap. She'd given up art school for him, given up everything. He kept reading, needing to know. I told Whit I got into a school but decided not to go. I didn't tell him about the scholarship, about how badly I wanted it. I was afraid if he knew, he'd insist I go, and then I'd resent him for making me choose. Better to make the choice myself and own it. Better to let him think it was easy. We got married today under the oak tree. He looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered, and I knew I'd made the right choice. But there's a small part of me that whispers, what if? I'm allowed to wonder, aren't I? I'm allowed to grieve the path not taken, even while embracing the one I'm on. Entries over the years showed Lorna returning to that question, not constantly, not obsessively, but periodically, wondering what her life would have been like if she'd chosen differently. Saw a magazine article about a woman artist today. She's my age, successful, showing in galleries across the country. I felt a sharp stab of envy, then immediate guilt. I have Whit, I have Kenny, I have this good life. Why isn't it enough? Why do I still wonder about the other path? Sometimes I imagine what would have happened if I'd gone to Chicago. Would I have been happy? Would I have been successful? Would I have been fulfilled? Or would I have been lonely, struggling, regretting the love I'd left behind? There's no way to know. Both futures existed as possibilities, and I could only live one. But then, years later, I painted it today. The life I didn't live. Put it on canvas, me in that studio, in that gallery, in Paris, teaching, creating in some imaginary apartment. I painted all the what-ifs, all the alternate Lornas who existed in my mind, but never in reality. And something shifted. By making those dreams visible, I could finally see them clearly. See what I'd given up, yes, but also what I'd gained. The life I painted was lonely, beautiful, but lonely. No wit, no children, just art and solitude. Maybe I chose right after all. Whit wiped his eyes, not realizing he'd been crying. She'd painted the life she hadn't lived so she could let it go. More entries, moving forward in time. I don't regret my choice. I need to say that clearly, even if only to myself. I chose love, I chose family, I chose wit and this farm and these children. Did I give up dreams? Yes. But I gained different ones, better ones maybe, at least ones that included people who love me. The what-ifs are getting quieter. I'm 50 now, and I can see my life with clarity I didn't have at 25. If I'd gone to art school, I might have succeeded or failed. I might have been fulfilled or empty. But I wouldn't have had this 40 years of marriage to a good man, 3 children who are becoming good people, a barn where I can create without pressure or expectation. I wouldn't trade it. Not anymore. The wondering is finally done. The last entry about the alternate life was dated 5 years ago. I'm hanging these paintings in the locked cabinet. Not because I'm ashamed, but because they're finished now. I've acknowledged the path not taken, honored it, and I'm ready to let it rest. These paintings are my goodbye to the artist I might have been, so I can fully embrace the artist I am. The woman who creates in a barn while dinner cooks, the woman who paints her family instead of strangers, the woman who chose love and doesn't regret it. Whit looked at the paintings again with new understanding. They weren't expressions of regret. They were Lorna's way of acknowledging and releasing an alternate future. She'd given those dreams form so she could say goodbye to them. He found one more canvas in the cabinet, a self-portrait he hadn't noticed. Lorna as an older woman, sitting in the barn with sunlight streaming through the windows, painting peacefully. Her face was lined, her hair grey, but her expression was serene, complete. On the back, in her handwriting, every path has its sacrifices. Every choice means letting go of something. I chose this life, this love, this version of myself, and I'd choose it again, not because the other path was wrong, but because this one was right for me. I was an artist who loved, not an artist who only created. That's not a lesser thing. That might be the greater thing. Whit sat surrounded by the paintings of lives Lorna had never lived, and he felt a complicated mix of emotions, grief that she'd given up so much, gratitude that she'd chosen him, guilt that he'd never known, and finally, acceptance. Everyone carried roads not taken. Everyone wondered about the life they might have lived if they'd chosen differently. Lorna had just been brave enough to paint those alternate paths, examine them, and consciously choose to let them go. She hadn't hidden these paintings out of shame or regret. She'd locked them away because they represented a finished process, the work of acknowledging what she'd sacrificed and making peace with that sacrifice. And now Whit understood something profound. Lorna's love for him hadn't been diminished by her wondering. If anything, it was strengthened by it. She'd known what she was giving up, had acknowledged it honestly, and had still chosen him, chosen their life together, chosen love over individual dreams. That was worth more than blind devotion. That was love with eyes wide open. 3 weeks passed, and Whit spent most of them in the barn. He'd process what he'd learned, sit with the weight of it, let understanding settle into his bones. The alternate life paintings stayed in the cabinet, but he'd look at them sometimes, seeing them now as testaments to conscious choice rather than loss. His children noticed the change in him. He was quieter, more reflective, but also more at peace than he'd been since Lorna died. When Paulette asked about it, he simply said, "I'm getting to know your mother in a way I never did before." One evening, as the family gathered for Sunday dinner at the farmhouse, Whit made a decision. They were all there, Paulette with her husband and the grandchildren, Kenny and Brent with their families. 12 people crowded around the old table, passing plates and talking over each other in the comfortable chaos of family. After the meal, when the children were playing in the yard and the adults lingered over coffee, Whit cleared his throat. "I want to talk to you all about something," he said. "About your mother and the barn and what happens next." They all turned to him, attentive, waiting. "I've been thinking about what Lorna created out there, 35 years of work, and nobody but us knows it exists." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want to change that. I want to organize an exhibition, show her work to the community." Silence fell over the table. Then everyone spoke at once. "An exhibition?" Paulette's eyes lit up. "Would Mom want that?" Kenny looked uncertain. "Where would we even do that?" Brent asked practically. Whit raised his hand, and they quieted. "I know it's a big step, and I've thought about whether Lorna would approve. But I found something in her last journal she wrote, that she was too afraid to show her work while she was alive, but she hoped someone might see it after. She said, 'Maybe after. Maybe then. It's okay.' She wanted to be seen," Paulette said softly. "She just couldn't do it herself." "Exactly." Whit looked at each of his children in turn. "The barn was private because she needed it to be while she was creating. But she's gone now, and this work deserves to exist beyond these walls. It deserves to be witnessed." "What would we show?" Kenny asked, warming to the idea. "There's so much. The landscapes, the family paintings, some of the sculptures, but not everything." Whit was firm on this. "The locked cabinet paintings stay private. Those were for her process, not for display. And the most personal letters stay with us. But the rest, I think we can share that." They spent the next hour planning. Paulette would coordinate the logistics, contact the community center about space. Kenny would handle the practical details, transportation, display, materials, lighting. Brent offered to design the layout, thinking about how to arrange the pieces to tell a story. "When should we do it?" Paulette asked. Whit had already thought about this. 3 weeks from now, on what would have been our 41st anniversary. Eyes grew damp around the table. It was perfect timing, honoring their marriage while revealing the fullness of who Lorna had been. Over the next days, they worked together. Whit selected pieces carefully, choosing paintings that showed Lorna's range and skill without exposing her most private moments. The family portrait would be the centerpiece. The landscapes that showed their farm through seasons and years, the sculptures that demonstrated her versatility. Paulette photographed everything, creating a catalogue. Kenny built simple frames for paintings that needed them. Brent sketched layouts, thinking about flow and story and emotional impact. Whit spent his evenings writing an exhibition statement. He started and stopped dozens of times, struggling to capture Lorna's essence without reducing her to simple explanations. How did you describe a woman who'd been both completely present and privately creative, who'd loved her family fiercely while also needing space apart from them? Finally, he wrote simply, "For 35 years, my wife Lorna created in solitude, not because she was unhappy, but because she needed space to be fully herself." This barn was where she processed her life, her love, and her emotions through art. She was a wife, a mother, and an artist. All three at once. This exhibition honors every part of who she was. The week before the exhibition, Whit made a discovery. He'd been moving paintings to load into Kenny's truck when he noticed one more canvas on the easel, hidden behind a drop cloth. He pulled the cloth away, and his breath caught. It was unfinished, rough sketches in some places, fully rendered in others. The painting showed the barn from outside, the large doors open, golden light streaming out into twilight, and in the doorway, a silhouette. A man's figure, standing at the threshold, about to step inside. Whit moved closer, studying the details. Lorna had completed. The man's posture, the way he held his shoulders, the angle of his head, it was him. She'd been painting him, standing in the barn doorway, illuminated from behind. On the easel ledge was a note in her shaky, late-stage handwriting. "Waiting for you to understand." Whit's throat closed. This had been her last painting, the one she'd been working on before the illness made it impossible to continue. She'd been painting the moment she hoped would come, the moment he'd finally enter her sanctuary and see her fully. She'd known he'd honor her boundary while she was alive, known he'd respect her privacy even if he didn't understand it, but she'd also hoped that after, he'd find the courage to step inside and discover the truth of who she'd been. This painting was her invitation from beyond death, her way of saying, "Come in, see me, understand." Whit decided immediately. This unfinished canvas would be in the exhibition. It would be the centerpiece alongside the family portrait, because it told the most important part of the story, that Lorna had created all of this, knowing he'd eventually find it. She'd been painting for him all along, even in her solitude. The night before the exhibition, Whit sat alone in the barn one last time before it would be emptied for transport. He looked at the space familiar now, no longer forbidden or mysterious, just a place where someone he loved had been fully herself. "I hope I'm doing right by you," he said to the silence. "I hope this is what you wanted." The barn didn't answer, but somehow Whit felt certainty settle over him. This was right. Lorna had lived privately, but her legacy deserved to be public. Her art deserved to touch people beyond her family. Her story deserved to be told. He locked the barn door and walked back to the farmhouse under a sky full of stars. Tomorrow, the community would see what he'd seen. They'd understand what he now understood, that love sometimes means giving someone space to be more than just yours. That creativity can coexist with devotion, that a woman can be wife and mother and artist, all at once, all equally important. Tomorrow, Lorna would finally be seen, and Whit would be there to make sure the world saw her truly. The morning of the exhibition arrived with perfect weather, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the smell of hay and wildflowers. Whit dressed carefully in the suit he'd worn to Lorna's funeral, then changed his mind. She wouldn't want formal. She'd want him comfortable, himself. He put on clean jeans, and the blue shirt she'd always said brought out his eyes. The community center had been transformed. White walls, professional lighting borrowed from the high school theater department, Lorna's paintings displayed with the reverence they deserved. The massive family portrait dominated one wall, the unfinished painting of Whit in the doorway beside it. Landscapes arranged by season, sculptures on pedestals, small, plaques with dates and brief descriptions. Whit arrived early, walked through the space alone, his life with Lorna made visible and public. 40 years of marriage rendered in oils and carved wood. It was beautiful and overwhelming, and exactly right. His children arrived with their families. Paulette had tears in her eyes before she even entered. "Dad, it's perfect." "Your mother was perfect," Whit said. "We're just showing what was already there." A leather-bound guest book sat on a table by the entrance, Paulette's idea. "Let people write their reactions," she'd said. "Let Mom's work speak to them, and let them speak back." The doors opened at 10. Whit had expected maybe 30 people, some neighbors, a few friends, family. Instead, over 100 people filed through in the first hour alone. Word had spread through the small farming community. Everyone wanted to see what Lorna Carver had been hiding in that barn for 35 years. Whit stationed himself near the entrance, greeting people, shaking hands, accepting condolences mixed with amazement. "I had no idea Lorna was an artist," said Mrs. Rutherford from the church auxiliary. "She was always so quiet." "She was quiet about a lot of things," Whit replied, "but she was paying attention to everything." Old neighbors walked through with expressions of wonder. "That's my barn," one man said, pointing at a landscape. "She painted my barn. I never knew she even looked at it that way." A woman, Whit recognized from Lorna's book club, stood before a painting of the cornfields at sunset, crying quietly. When Whit approached, she said, "I always felt like Lorna saw more than the rest of us. This proves it. She saw the beauty in ordinary things." People lingered at the family portrait. Parents brought their children, pointing out how the faces layered over time. "See how they grow up right in the painting," one father explained to his daughter. "That's what life is, all our ages existing at once in memory." The local high school art teacher spent 20 minutes examining technique, brush strokes, color choices. She found Whit and said, "Your wife was genuinely talented. Self-taught, you said." "Learned from library books and practice," Whit confirmed. "Remarkable. She had an instinctive understanding of composition and light that most people never develop." The teacher paused. "She could have had a career, you know, if circumstances had been different." "She knew that," Whit said quietly. "She chose a different path and kept creating anyway. That's a real artist, someone who makes art because they have to, not for recognition." The teacher touched his arm gently. She was the genuine article. A young woman approached Whit mid-afternoon. She couldn't have been more than 25, carrying a portfolio under her arm. "Mr. Carver? I'm a painter. I've never shown anyone my work either. My family doesn't understand why I spend so much time alone, making art nobody sees." Her eyes were bright with tears. "Your wife's story makes me feel less alone, less strange." Whit's voice was rough when he answered. "Lorna would have wanted you to know that creating for yourself is valid. You don't need an audience to make it matter. But maybe someday," the young woman said, "I'll be brave enough to show people. Like she did, even if it had to be after." People wrote in the guest book pages and pages of reactions. Whit read some of them during a quiet moment. "Lorna's art reminds me that we all have hidden depths. What a gift to see hers. I'm a mother of 3, and I feel so seen by this. Thank you for sharing her private world." The family portrait made me cry. That's my life too, all the ages of my children existing together in my memory. Why did she hide this? It's too beautiful to keep secret. That last comment made Whit smile sadly. People still didn't quite understand. Lorna hadn't hidden her art out of shame or fear of judgment. She'd kept it private because privacy was what made it possible. The barn had been her refuge precisely because no one was watching, judging, expecting. By mid-afternoon, something unexpected happened. The art teacher approached with a red sticker. "Mr. Carver, I'd like to purchase this landscape, the one of the old oak tree." Whit shook his head automatically. "These aren't for sale. This is a memorial." "I know. But your wife was an artist, and artists deserve to have their work valued and collected. Let me buy this piece. Let her be what she was, not just your wife, not just a mother, but an artist whose work has monetary worth." Whit hesitated, looked at Paulette. She'd been listening, and now nodded. "Let people buy them, Dad. Mom would have been too humble to sell while alive. But that's exactly why we should now. It honors what she was." They made a decision quickly, quietly. Any pieces people wanted to purchase would be sold, with proceeds going to a scholarship fund for women artists. Lorna would want Other women to have opportunities she'd turned down. Red stickers began appearing next to paintings: the oak tree landscape, a winter scene, a portrait of the farmhouse. People buying art to honor Lorna, to support the cause, to own something beautiful she'd created. The local library director asked about displaying several pieces permanently. We'd be honored to give her work a permanent home. The church wanted the painting that showed the oak tree where Whit and Lorna had married. The high school art department requested the farmhouse painting for their hallway. Lorna's work was finding homes throughout the community, becoming part of the town's collective memory. She was transforming from private creator to public legacy. Kenny found Whit in the late afternoon, as the crowd began to thin. "You okay, Dad?" "She spent 35 years creating in secret," Whit said, his voice wondering, "and in one day she's touched hundreds of people. She would have loved this," Kenny said, "and been terrified by it." "Yes," Whit agreed. "Both things at once. That was your mother, full of contradictions that somehow made perfect sense." As evening approached, a man in an expensive suit entered, clearly not local. He studied the paintings with professional attention, took notes, examined signatures and dates. Finally, he approached Whit. "Mr. Carver, I'm a curator from a gallery in the city. I heard about this exhibition and drove out to see for myself." He handed Whit a business card. "Your wife's work belongs in a broader context. I'd like to include several pieces in an upcoming show about self-taught Midwest artists. With your permission, of course." Whit stared at the card, overwhelmed. This was beyond anything he'd imagined. "Think about it," the curator said. "But I believe Lorna Carver deserves to be seen beyond this community. Her work has something important to say about women's creativity, about private art, about the interior lives we all maintain." After he left, Whit stood alone with the family portrait, the painting that had started everything. Lorna's face looked back at him, all her ages, all her selves visible at once. "You're not hidden anymore," he whispered. The exhibition continued through the evening, and the atmosphere shifted from curious observation to genuine celebration. People who'd known Lorna casually discovered they hadn't known her at all. Neighbors shared stories, small moments that now made sense in light of her artistic life. "I saw her sketching once, years ago," old Mr. Patterson said, "sitting by the creek. When she saw me, she closed the book real quick, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. Now, I understand she wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just being private." More red stickers appeared as evening fell. A young couple bought a spring landscape for their first home. The book club purchased a painting of the town square to donate to the library. Individual pieces found buyers who connected with them personally, emotionally. Whit watched Lorna's private world become public property, not in a violating way, but in a way that felt like sharing something precious. Each person who bought a painting or stood, moved before a sculpture, was carrying a piece of Lorna forward into the future. The curator approached again before leaving. "I'm serious about the gallery show. Your wife's work fits into an important conversation about women artists who create outside traditional systems. She made art for herself, on her own terms, without asking permission. That's powerful." "I'll think about it," Whit promised, tucking the business card into his wallet next to the art magazine review he still didn't have, but would soon. As the community center prepared to close, Whit did a final walkthrough. The guest book was full pages of heartfelt responses to Lorna's life work. He read a few more. "Thank you for reminding us that everyone has depths we can't see. Your wife's art gave me permission to take my own creativity seriously. I lost my spouse last year. This exhibition helped me understand that love means respecting the parts of each other we'll never fully know." Paulette found him standing before the unfinished painting, Whit's silhouette in the barn doorway, light streaming out around him. "This one's my favorite," she said. "Mine too," Whit admitted. She was painting the future, painting me, finally understanding. And now you do. Now I do. They began the careful work of packing unsold pieces. The family portrait would return to the barn that was non-negotiable. Some landscapes, some personal paintings, the sculptures Whit couldn't bear to part with. But many pieces had found new homes, and somehow that felt right. Lorna's art wouldn't gather dust in a barn anymore. It would live in houses and public spaces, seen and appreciated. Kenny and Brent helped load Kenny's truck. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared understanding. They'd all learned something about their mother today, that she'd been more complex, more talented, more privately fulfilled than they'd known. "Do you think she was happy?" Brent asked as they secured the last painting. Whit considered the question. Yes, in a complicated way, but yes, she had us, and she had the barn. She had love, and she had creative space. Maybe that's all anyone needs, people who matter, and room to be yourself. "She got both," Paulette said, "because you gave her the barn and never asked questions." "I trusted her," Whit said simply. "That's what love is, isn't it? Trusting someone even when you don't fully understand." They locked the community center as the last visitors left. People called out thanks as they departed, told Whit how moved they'd been, how they'd never forget Lorna's work. Standing in the parking lot, watching taillights disappear down the road, Whit felt something shift inside him. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had changed shape. Instead of sharp and cutting, it had become softer, fuller, less like loss and more like love that had nowhere to go except inward. "She's not hidden anymore," he said to his children. "The whole town knows now what she was, what she could do. They know what we always knew," Paulette corrected gently, "that she was extraordinary. But now they know why," Kenny added. "Now they understand the quiet was because she was creating, not because she had nothing to say." "She had everything to say," Brent finished. "She just said it in paint and wood instead of words. They went back to the farmhouse together, ordered pizza like they used to when the kids were young. The grandchildren ran around the yard, catching fireflies, while the adults sat on the porch, talking about the day, about Lorna, about the future." "What will you do with the barn now?" Paulette asked. Whit had been thinking about that. Keep it, use it, not let it go back to being forbidden or forgotten. "Maybe I'll take up woodworking out there, or maybe I'll just sit and remember. But it won't be locked anymore. It'll be part of the farm again, part of our lives." "Mom would like that," Kenny said. "The barn being open, being used." "She left it for us," Whit agreed. "Not to preserve like a museum, but to integrate back into the living." Later, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Whit walked out to the barn. The family portrait was back in its place on the wall, the unfinished painting beside it. Most of the other work was gone, sold, donated, promised to the gallery, but the bones of Lorna's workspace remained. He stood in the doorway, exactly where she'd painted him standing. The light from the bare bulb inside spilled out into the darkness, just like in her painting. She'd seen this moment coming, had known he'd eventually stand right here, understanding finally flooding through him. "I see you now," he said to the empty barn, to Lorna's lingering presence, to the ghosts of 35 years of secret creation. "All of you, every part, and I love it all." The barn didn't answer, but somehow Whit felt heard. Felt Lorna's approval radiating from the walls, from the paintings, from the workbench where she'd carved his hands holding a bird. He stepped inside, pulling the door closed behind him but not locking it. Never locking it again. The barn was open now. The secrets were known. Lorna was finally, fully seen. And Whit was learning that sometimes the greatest act of love is giving someone space to be wholly themselves, even if it takes 40 years to understand why. 3 months after the exhibition, autumn settled over the farm. The cornfields had been harvested, leaves were turning gold and crimson, and the air carried that particular crispness that meant winter was waiting just beyond the horizon. Whit's daily routine had changed. Mornings still found him on the porch with coffee, still watching Lorna's ring catch the sunlight. But afternoons now took him to the barn, where he'd set up his own workspace alongside hers. He'd taken up painting badly at first, almost laughably so. His first attempts looked like a child's work compared to Lorna's skilled pieces. But he kept trying, kept learning. Lorna did this alone for 35 years, he told Paulette when she gently suggested classes. Least I can do is try. The barn had become his refuge now, the way it had been Lorna's. He understood it finally. The peace of creating something with your hands, the quiet that came from focusing completely on color and form and expression. He painted simple things. The farmhouse at different times of day, the old oak tree, the fields stretching toward the horizon. His children visited more regularly now, often spending time in the barn with him. The grandchildren painted there too, their wild, joyful creations tacked to the walls alongside Lorna's sophisticated work. The barn had become a family space, no longer forbidden, no longer secret. "Grandma would love this," Lucy said one Saturday, painting a purple horse with bright enthusiasm. "She'd love that we're all making art together." "She would," Whit agreed, working on his own canvas, a sunset that was coming out better than he'd expected. The scholarship fund had raised enough for 3 full scholarships. The first recipient was announced in September, a young woman from the next county over, heading to art school with all expenses paid. She'd visited the farm, met Whit, seen Lorna's remaining work. "Your wife gave me permission to dream," she'd said, tears in her eyes. "My family thinks art school is impractical, but this scholarship says my dreams matter. It says women like me deserve the chances we weren't given before." Whit had hugged her, this stranger who carried Lorna's legacy forward. Go be the artist she would have been. Make the most of what she couldn't have. The gallery show had happened to Lorna's work, displayed in the city alongside other self-taught Midwest artists. Paulette and Kenny had attended, sent photos to Whit. Lorna's name on a gallery wall, her paintings lit professionally, people standing before them in thoughtful silence. A review in an art magazine called her work a revelation, the rich interior life of a woman who created not for fame, but for survival, for joy, for self-preservation. Lorna Carver's art reminds us that creativity doesn't require permission or audience. It requires only courage and commitment. Whit kept that review folded in his wallet next to the curator's business card and a photo of Lorna from their wedding day. The barn itself had changed subtly. Whit had added his woodworking bench, building things alongside where Lorna had painted them. He was making a rocking chair for Paulette's new baby, taking his time with it, enjoying the process of creation. He'd found more of Lorna's letters, ones he'd missed in his first explorations, letters about ordinary days that had mattered to her, letters about watching him work, about loving the steadiness in him, about gratitude for a life that had room for both togetherness and solitude. One letter, dated just a year before she died. "I've been thinking about legacy lately. What will I leave behind? The children, of course, they're the best of me made visible, but also this barn, these paintings, these records of our life. If Whit ever opens this place, I hope he understands. I hope he sees that loving him and needing this space weren't contradictory. They were complementary. This barn is proof I loved our life enough to want to process it, preserve it, understand it deeply. Every painting is a love letter. Every sculpture is gratitude made solid. I hope he knows that." Whit did know. Finally, completely, he knew. On what would have been their 41st anniversary, Whit hung his first completed painting on the barn wall. It was rough, imperfect, clearly the work of a beginner. But It was his, a simple scene of the barn at sunrise, painted from his heart rather than skill. He hung it beside Lorna's unfinished canvas, the one showing him in the doorway. Together, the paintings told a story, Lorna waiting for him to understand, and Whit finally understanding enough to create something of his own. "I get it now," he said to her memory, to the barn that held so much of her spirit. "You weren't running away from us. You were running toward yourself so you could come back more whole. And I should have understood sooner, but I understand now." The barn didn't answer, but sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. The same light that had illuminated Lorna's work for 35 years, the same light that now illuminated his beginner's attempts. Outside, he could hear his grandchildren playing in the yard. Inside, he was surrounded by evidence of Lorna's private passion, the easels, the supplies, the workspace she'd built for herself. And now his workspace, too. The barn was no longer a secret or a mystery. It was simply what it had always been, a space for creation, for solitude, for becoming more fully yourself, so you could be more fully present with the people you loved. Whit picked up his brush and started another painting. He had decades to make up for. Decades of not understanding what Lorna had known all along, that art wasn't about product or audience. It was about process, about the doing, about the space between who you were and who you were becoming. Winter came to the farm, and with it a quietness that felt appropriate rather than lonely. Snow covered the fields in white silence, and the barn stood solid against the cold, smoke rising from the small wood stove Whit had installed so he could work through the winter months. He was 70 now. Birthday had passed quietly in November, and he found himself thinking about time differently. Not as something running out, but as something layered, the way Lorna had painted their family portrait. All his ages existed at once, the young man who'd proposed under the oak tree, the middle-aged farmer who'd struggled through hard years, the widower discovering his wife's secrets, and now this, an old man learning to create. The barn had become something unexpected, a place where past and present merged. Lorna's paintings still hung on the walls, her supplies still organized on the shelves. But now Whit's attempts hung beside them, his tools rested on the workbench, his presence filled the space that had been hers alone. He wasn't trying to replace her or complete her unfinished work. He was simply adding his own voice to the conversation she'd started. Every painting he made was his response to hers, his way of saying, "I understand now. I see what you were doing here." One January evening, as snow fell softly outside, Whit sat at the kitchen table with photo albums spread before him. He'd started a new project, creating a visual record of Lorna's legacy. Pictures from the exhibition, photos of the scholarship recipients, images of her paintings in their new homes throughout the community. He added new photos too. The grandchildren painting in the barn, his own clumsy artworks, the space transformed from forbidden to welcoming. The barn's story hadn't ended with Lorna's death. It had simply entered a new chapter. Paulette stopped by with little Griffin, now 9, and fascinated by his great-grandmother's story. "Grandpa, tell me again about the barn," he asked, settling into the chair beside Whit. "What do you want to know?" Whit asked. Why did great-grandma keep it secret? Whit thought about how to explain it to a child. Sometimes people need a space that's just theirs, not because they don't love their family, but because they need room to be themselves. Your great-grandmother loved us very much, but she also needed to be Lorna the artist, not just Lorna the wife and mother. And you let her? I did. I trusted her to know what she needed. Griffin considered this. I think that's love, letting people be themselves. Yes, Whit said, his throat tight. That's exactly what love is. After they left, Whit walked out to the barn through the snow. Inside, he lit the wood stove and stood warming his hands, looking around at this space that held so much meaning. He'd been thinking lately about what Lorna had written, that every painting was a love letter, every sculpture was gratitude made solid. He understood that now. She hadn't been hiding from him in this barn. She'd been loving him from here, processing their life together in a way that required solitude and reflection. And now he was doing the same. Each painting he created was his way of continuing the conversation with her, of processing his grief and gratitude and the profound complexity of 40 years of marriage. He pulled out a canvas and began to paint. Not the farm or the fields or anything external. Instead, he painted from memory Lorna in the kitchen, humming while she cooked. Lorna in the garden, her hands in the soil. Lorna reading in the evening light, peaceful and content. He painted her the way she'd painted their family, with love and close attention, and the desire to preserve what mattered. His technique was rough, his skill limited, but his heart was in every brushstroke. As he worked, he thought about the journey of the past months, finding the key, opening the barn, discovering Lorna's hidden life, the shock, the grief, the wonder, the understanding. The exhibition that had shared her with the community, the scholarship that ensured her legacy, lived on. And now this him in her space, creating his own art, keeping the barn alive and productive and meaningful. He thought about the locked cabinet paintings, the life Lorna hadn't lived. She'd wondered about alternate paths, but had ultimately chosen this one, chosen him, chosen their life together. And she'd made that choice with full awareness of what she was giving up. That was worth more than anything. That was love in its truest form, clear-eyed, conscious, committed. Whit finished the painting as midnight approached. It wasn't good by any objective measure, but it was honest. It showed Lorna as he'd known her, quiet, present, watching the world with an artist's eye, even when she wasn't in the barn. He hung it on the wall beside all her work, his amateur attempt alongside her skilled pieces. They belonged together, proof that love and creativity could coexist, that marriage could include solitude, that two people could be completely devoted while still maintaining separate spaces for their individual selves. Before leaving the barn, Whit did something he'd started doing every night. He spoke aloud to Lorna, updating her on the day, telling her about the grandchildren, about his painting progress, about life continuing without her but still including her. "The barn isn't secret anymore," he said to the quiet space. "Everyone knows now what you did here, how talented you were, how much you loved us even while you needed this space. And I hope that's okay. I hope I did right by you." He paused, listening to the silence, feeling her presence in every corner. "You were always enough, Lorna. More than enough. You were everything. And this barn proves it, 35 years of choosing our life while also choosing yourself. That wasn't selfish. That was wisdom. You knew what you needed to be fully present with us, and you took it. Thank you for that. Thank you for trusting me to respect your boundary, and thank you for leaving me the key." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the farm in peaceful white. Inside the barn, surrounded by Lorna's life work and his own beginning attempts, Whit felt something he hadn't felt since she died. Complete peace. He understood now. Finally, fully, he understood. Love wasn't about knowing everything about someone. It was about trusting them even in the mystery. It was about giving space while staying connected. It was about respecting boundaries while remaining devoted. And sometimes the deepest love meant waiting 40 years to open a door, respecting a promise, until the person you loved gave you permission to see the truth. Whit locked the barn not to keep secrets, but simply to close up for the night, and walked back to the farmhouse through the snow. The barn stood behind him, solid and enduring, no longer forbidden but forever sacred, a place where creativity lived, where love was made visible, where Lorna had been fully herself so she could be fully present with her family. And now, where Whit was learning the same lesson his wife had known all along, that everyone needs space to breathe, to create, to remember who they are beyond the roles they play. The barn had taught him that. Lorna had taught him that. And he would carry that understanding for whatever years remained, grateful for the woman who'd loved him enough to need something separate from him and wise enough to leave him the key so he could finally understand why.